What's up, guys? Kurt Hughes here with Ignite Baseball. Just on my drive home here from a couple lessons. I had a parent ask me a pretty interesting question last night, which I thought this would be a good place to address that question. Essentially, the question was, should my son continue to work on to do lessons during the winter, even though there isn't any games for him to actually apply what it is he's learning? And my answer was he definitely should continue lessons during the winter. And I'm not saying that as like make this decision from like a financial end on my end. I'm saying that because it's actually better to be able to really like pattern and get movement 100% concrete figured out when you don't have to apply it in games. If you're doing training in season, what ends up happening is you have a constant stress of how the heck am I gonna apply the stuff that I just learned today in a game? And you have to really like close your eyes to that you just learned it and not really worry about applying it right away if you're practicing in season, because what ends up happening is it's too much for you to actually be able to, handle mentally. So you're not going to be able to apply it well anyway. So you shouldn't really stress about trying to make that happen. So usually what I just tell guys is that, and gals, is that when you're first starting to learn this stuff, before it's like really like programmed in, you don't have to think about it as much. You really should just have fun in your games and just, don't even really worry about the way that you're swinging. But once it starts getting like really programmed into the brain, it becomes a lot easier to actually apply it, and you can access it really, really easily. So a lot of times when you're not playing, you don't have to worry about being game ready, so you can just work on the movement, pattern the movement over and over and over and over and over and over, and then all of a sudden you don't have to think about it. Like, you don't really think about the way that you brush your teeth. You don't really think about the way that you get out of bed in the morning, and eventually you don't really want to have to think about the way that you hit, because if you're thinking about the way that you hit when a pitcher is throwing to you, what ends up happening is you're not really able to actually apply what you're doing in that situation. You just go back to the patterns that your brain has already built for you. So you really need to rebuild and reprogram the patterns and really override your old movement pattern. So it's unrealistic to think that that's going to happen overnight. So it's really good actually to do this kind of stuff and not play in games. That way you can kind of set realistic goals for yourself, and you don't have to focus one day on working on the movement and then focus one day on applying the movement in the game. You can just focus on the movement, and then I always try to do a really good job of setting realistic goals for hitters in lessons, so I'm not like, hey, okay, let's work on some dowel turns, let's work on some med ball tosses, and then the next step in the progression would never be like, okay, let's hit a 95-mile-an-hour fastball. That doesn't make any sense. You don't want to jump to a spot where you're setting a hitter up for failure. So you always want to set realistic goals and realistic expectations about what a hitter can actually accomplish. So when you're focusing on movement, make sure that the goals that the hitter is trying to accomplish and whatever is going on are movement goals. And when you're working on hitting, when you first start hitting, you still have to make them focus on movement and not let the ball control what they do, because if the ball controls what they do, what ends up happening is kids get they jump back to their old patterns, whatever is programmed in more. So what needs to happen in order for you to be really successful in games is the new swing, the one where you're moving more efficiently, has got to be programmed in more. So if it's not programmed in more than the old pattern, then it's not going to work. So that being said, those seasons where maybe like, let's say in the fall, like usually the pattern that kids like stick by when they're playing is they'll play their spring season, right? They'll play their summer season, and they'll play their fall season, and then the winter is when like they do their training. But sometimes, you know, it's not smart to play in the summer. Sometimes it's not smart to play in the fall because your movement isn't where it needs to be. Let's say that you're someone who has plus speed, and you're someone that has a plus arm and a plus glove, and the only thing that's really holding you back from playing either college at a high level or playing pro ball or whatever is really like your bat, right? So if your bat is holding you back, then sometimes it's good to not play for that season so you can work on that one component of it, really hone in on it. And then when you play your next season, you know, let's say that you skip the fall, when you play your next season in the spring, you've worked on it so much that it's just like brushing your teeth or just like getting out of bed in the morning. And what ends up happening is you're able to apply it right away. So that's kind of, you know, the landscape of like how to deal with this stuff. Now some people, you can give them something and they pick up on it in 2 seconds and they can apply it right away. And other people, when you give them something, it takes them quite a bit longer. And that's not like an indictment on, you know, one type of person that really understands how their body moves versus another. All that means is that the person who doesn't quite have the body awareness, they need to work on things more to be able to accomplish it. But the cool thing about them is that once they get it, they never lose it. Whereas someone who figures something out in 2 seconds, yeah, that's great that they figured it out in 2 seconds, but a lot of times they can fool themselves into thinking that they have it totally figured out, but they haven't established, you know, the neurological pathways to be able to get back to that every single time. And when that happens, a lot of times guys won't be able to apply it in games for a really long time because they don't work on it enough, and it's not, you know, part of their daily routine. So it's so important that, you know, if you don't have a great understanding of how your body moves and you really need to work on this stuff a lot, then you spend the time and really focus in on it. But at the same time, if you have a good understanding of how your body moves, you still have to really focus in on it, because if you can't override your old patterns and access your new patterns, then it's just not going to work. So regardless, the amount of work that you put into it is the limiting factor in you being successful or not.